What do you mean Tony Stark doesn't believe in the Norse gods? Today on Attention Span Labs. Hello and welcome to this episode of Attention Span Labs. I'm your host, Michael DiBaggio, and this episode will continue part 2 of my discussion with Shel Presto and ArtAnon about falling in and out of love with comic books. In part 2, we'll continue right where we left off in our conversation about when superhero comics went wrong and who's to blame. You'll find out what scene in Fear itself caused me to stop buying Marvel altogether, and why ArtAnon thinks Frank Miller's The Dark Knight ruined Batman. We'll also talk about why a misguided attempt to inject realism is the death of the superhero genre, why the Hugo Awards have become a guarantee of boring science fiction, and a lot more. As always, we want to know what you think, so be sure to let us know in the comments and share the video with your friends.
So I'll just finish quickly what really made me finally give up in exasperation with Marvel and DC at the same time, but in particular the Fear itself storyline. There's a part where Iron Man is trying to get Odin's help to defeat this Asgardian supernatural entity that is about to destroy the Earth, but he has to sacrifice something to Odin. So he sacrifices his sobriety. But in this like drunken 5-page spread, he goes on, he's like talking to himself, but like praying to Odin sort of for help in making the super armor. And Tony Stark goes on to say, "I'm an atheist, and I shouldn't even believe in you." And it was like record scratch, stop, what does it mean for a guy who's on the same team for 30 years with Thor to say that he's an atheist? What does it mean for him to say he doesn't believe in the Norse gods? He's been to Asgard.
You just had a writer insert. They're talking about, and you know this. They're talking about something else entirely,
right?
I.e., Christianity. But they're inserting themselves into the story to say this is what I believe, even though it has nothing to do with the story itself.
Exactly, and that was very clear to me, and I was like, you could see the beginnings of them of frankly, to use the word in its correct sense, a fascist agenda starting back in Civil War, and they weren't yet on the full blown SJW trajectory that they're at now. But that was the time that you were getting a lot of political insertions in the comics. You're getting the commentaries against religion, against whoever they considered right wing, against gun owners, against people who wanted to have some sort of limits on immigration or anything like that.
I was going to say heck on traditional marriage, but we have plans to make
Absolutely.
that another video in the future.
But yeah, actually, let me just before I cede the floor back to ArtAnon here, talk about the points he wanted to bring up. I want to briefly talk about that. Also bothered me, the destruction of all the of course the famous one is the stupid way they ended Peter Parker and Mary Jane's marriage. And why? Because Joe Quesada didn't like that he was married. And they sort of kind of they retconned Reed's marriage to Sue so that was actually his second wife. They did any kind of stable relationship over time they destroyed intentionally. Go ahead.
I'll throw out again the thing that got me off the Avengers in the first place: Hank Pym, Janet Van Dyne.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
And that's one of the more infamous ones, and it turned into this, maybe the artist got a bit too exuberant in his expressions, and then they made it like, him swatting Jan was like this terrible, unforgivable thing. Not the fact that he created Ultron and Ultron nearly destroyed the world in the nuclear holocaust and all this stuff. The really bad thing is that when he was like half crazy, he smacked his wife.
Right.
And they've lost all sense of moral proportion at that point. But the one that bothered me, although I was not a fan of the relationship, was Firestar and Justice, who were on the New Warriors, and then they were on the Avengers. And if you know me, I had a crush on Firestar since I was a little kid, right? So, and I never really liked Justice or Vance Astro, Marvel Boy. But they were engaged for a long time in the real world. And then there was no reason at all, really, why they should break up. But then they
mainly it was because they wanted her on the single girl Marvel Divas team.
And right, that was I'm not sure how close in time that was, but they just had her say, you know what, I don't want to be married anymore. I don't want to be engaged anymore. And that was it. And she was like, I'm not ready. After she was like pushing him for years and him saying he wasn't ready, and she just all of a sudden, goes and by then it could be more clear that, combined with like the Mary Jane Peter thing, doing things like bringing Gwen Stacy had an affair with the Green Goblin and had like all kinds of weird degenerate pervert stuff like that they were obviously inimical to any sort of these heroes having stable, healthy relationships. And that's all I want to say about that.
Right, but all of that goes back to what we alluded to with headcanon. The characters themselves in these books have a history, and you don't expect Reed Richards to go out and buy a nightclub. That's not how a story is going to develop with the Fantastic Four. It again kind of falls into that. Why are you trying to take a character into a direction that it is clear from the character's history they aren't going to go? They would have never gone here. The argument is always, well, we're updating or modernizing, or we're bringing him into the current day, and it just tends to be more. No, it's more along the lines of, you found a character that you don't like, and you're going to change that character. The two big things that I wanted to point out, I think that each of you brought up, was the reboot universe. One of the great taglines, I think John C. Wright brought it up in one of his blog articles, was that is time travel is the death of IP. And with a reboot universe where nothing really matters, because give it time for this year, we'll be done with this series, and then everyone will be back to square one. Nothing matters. How do you invest in a character? Well, Superman now has a brand new costume because this new artist is on it and is doing these grand things, and next year it's not. It's back to the traditional costume. It's a small thing, but okay, are we just going to pretend none of that exists? We're going to unravel everything and put it back? A number of, I think, events drove this. You got the big one from Marvel was the first conflict with Thanos, where you had a big crossover through Captain Marvel, the Avengers, Adam Warlock, where we did away with Thanos, but popular character, let's bring him back. So again, you did a little bit of no consequence for that villain, where the ending of that was very permanent for that character at that time. 1992, and the death of Superman. That was a huge event for DC, and I know Dan Jurgens was a big push behind that, along with Roger Stern, Louise Simonson. But you ended up with a series that really helped to kill the DC titles for quite some time. It made people very angry, much like what you were talking about, Shel, where I'm going to have to buy 30 of these books to get the entire story, and I'm getting it in dribs and drabs. So that's that crossover. I pull it all the way back to the Kree Skrull War. While that was an excellent story, good art, good writing, it really started, I think, one of the mainstream deconstruction of superheroes, as well as decompression of stories, that I'll tie all the way back to, for Marvel at least, that 1968 sale to somebody else who really wanted to monetize those books. The challenge that Stan Lee and Roy Thomas had when you went from 20 titles to 45 or 50 titles was, who the heck am I going to get to write these books? Stan pretty much had the schedule of Marvel Comics in his head and could track 20 books as he's playing either writer or editor. You can argue one way or another if Stan was really writing all the books or adding flair to it. Doesn't really matter. At least as the editor between 61 and 68, he could handle tracking what happened in the Marvel Universe across 20 books. As soon as that changed, now Roy Thomas has got a huge chunk of that in his head. And if Stan and Roy aren't talking, and Stan wasn't talking starting in about 1972, 73, he was going to Hollywood to sell Marvel the comics, which ultimately became the live-action Spider-Man series for one thing, as well as some of the cartoons in the 70s and 80s. So again, that no consequence because we'll just reboot it is really, I think, what is one of the cancers in comics today. There's nothing there that you can invest in, and
I agree completely.
Mm-hmm.
And then that again ties back into the crossovers. So I've got no investment, but I'm supposed to invest in all these other characters. In many cases, that I've stopped caring about because they're not really written like I remember. I'm going to keep rambling here just for a second because I want to go back to explain why I think that I've got a little bit different perspective on what you guys have, even though I was kind of only dipping in the 90s where you guys were really active in there. Again, since I stopped really buying mainstream comics in the 80s and was worried about filling out an older collection, when I was in graduate school, I changed to really not buying as many DC and Marvel, and I was buying a lot of independents. That was the time of the black and white comic book explosion, and I got into that like nobody's business. Even though it wasn't black and white, Nexus and the Rocketeer, but the black and white Tick, when Bed Enlund was first publishing that, The Trouble with Girls, and a number of other the black and whites for about 4 or 5 years. That was really where I was, and there was so much stuff that was going on there. It got kind of killed off because that then became the place to do adult comics, and really a lot of the superheroes and adventure comics were driven out of that. So once again, I kind of stepped away from comic books about that time because that would be probably mid towards late 90s, and just sort of never looked back at that point other than, popping in once in a while to say, okay, so what's on the shelves, flip through one or two and say, yep, not going there.
Yeah, I think it's a shame that on the one hand, it's sort of like how in Japan, cartoons are considered serious media and worthy of a presentation of a serious topic, even though of course they have silly and very some they have comedy series and weird adventure series in anime. But go ahead.
I always put it this way. It's like anime is just like movies. In America, there's movies for kids. In America,
Right.
There's movies for adults. There's romance, there's sci-fi, there's horror. Saying like anime collectively really doesn't mean anything. It's literally just talking about the presentation of the media.
Right. But by the same token, now there's this sense, growing sense that sequential art, aka comic books, can be used for telling other than kid stories, and that's good. But a problem crops up to it when you think that a superhero book is inherently juvenile, and that it's the evil masculine wish fulfillment, the sexy women and the powerful men doing things that no other mortals can do, and for whatever reason that like the adventure tale itself is sort of considered juvenile, and when it's not, like the Marvel Max series, which is intended for adults, it's really crass, it's really vulgar, it's gross, it's grotesquely violent, it's traumatic instead of cathartic. It's destructive to the heroic betrayals. So you actually have this. We talked about before, the deconstruction. The heroes are not heroes anymore.
Right, and I would argue that the Max series is the child-ish series. It's for kids who refuse to grow up and take responsibility for being an adult. I was just reminded, though, the one thing I wanted to bring up with Dark Knight, back, Mike, when you were talking about the refusal of the heroes in the Carnage saga to kill the character when it was very clear that he needed to be killed, otherwise he would continue to murder people, was the conclusion of the first Dark Knight. The Joker has killed an entire studio audience, as well as a number of police officers. He's running through a carnival, killing at random, and Batman isn't able to pull the trigger on offing the pest at the end of the story.
Mm-hmm.
That is the weakest superhero story ever for that reason. This is one of those it's that one event that sours the entire batch. I was enjoying Dark Knight up to that point, and it came to that. It's like, no, Bruce, kill him. It's the right thing to do.
Part of this, I think, is a confusion, and I understand their idealism. I understand the appeal of the author who believes Batman never kills because every life is important and everything, right? And I understand, I certainly understand that appeal. It has an appeal, and I believe every human life is important. Every human life is a reflection of his creator, and yet there is this confusion between a conditionally evil act and an intrinsically evil act. There's intrinsically evil acts like torture or rape, right? There's no ever can be no good purpose for them. Murder is intrinsically evil, but killing is not intrinsically evil because you can kill, for instance, in self-defense. It's not more virtuous to let Joker. It's not more virtuous to follow your really weirdly rigid code and allow Joker to murder other people, innocent people at the kids at the carnival and stuff like that. People in the studio than it is to kill him
and watch him do it is the big thing.
And right,
like you are actively going to save someone's life that is an innocent versus Joker.
Yeah, and it also torpedoes the entire idea of superhero comics in general. If that's how you believe, right, then what you're essentially saying is you're taking a quasi-pacifist position, which undermines the reason to have superheroes anyway, right? The reason you have superheroes is that they fight evil. But if they're not actually going to fight evil, then what's the point?
Correct. And that really bespeaks to the fact that the moral center of comic books, which is their inherent purpose, especially the superhero comic book, to tell a story of either justice or redemption, is lost. Without that moral center, you have no reason to tell a superhero story. It becomes kind of the riff that realism is the death of the superhero. And when we're talking about realism, the fact that, well, I've got to make this person human, so they can't really be a hero. They've got to be flawed, and they'll be failures, rather than saying they're flawed human beings that overcome those failures, that overcome the weakness that they find in themselves to succeed. Right. Again, you brought up the power fantasy of superhero, male power fantasy of superheroes. I'm sorry, I got no problem with male power fantasies. Rock on.
Right. Yeah, I think it's. Oh, sorry, Shell. Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say the other, and this too can be a video for its own its whole own topic. But the railing against the comic book being the male power fantasy is that by removing that, you're going against your entire established audience. So you don't want to be doing comic books anyway. Like if you go into Marvel Comics, if you say go on to Spider-Man, and you're like, I hate Spider-Man. I hate everything about Spider-Man. Let's reinvent Spider-Man. I hate the spandex. I hate Black Cat wearing her, V-neck costume down so you could see her cleavage. You don't want to be on that book. You shouldn't be writing Spider-Man because Spider-Man is already an established thing and you're talking to its audience by taking it over. So,
absolutely concur.
Going against the comic book as a male power fantasy, it's like, well, you may be wanting to do a comic book, but you don't want to be doing an established superhero comic book. So you shouldn't.
But and that's absolutely true if you understand them to have honest motives. On the other hand, if you understand that their motives are not honest and that they are nihilists, and that they don't just believe that, you could be a nihilist and think that, nothing matters. And then there's the sort of nihilists that actively want to destroy and take down anything that other people believe have importance. And that, frankly, is who has taken over media, the postmodern media in general. Certainly comic books, but also Hollywood, TV shows. Like I sort of touched on before, you get horror and suspense that is no longer cathartic, which is the real purpose of horror, but is traumatic. You get these grotesque displays of carnage, and that all they serve to show is how rotten everybody is. There's no hero. Everybody's a coward. Everybody's duplicitous. And it's a certain mindset that, frankly, is easy enough to get into nowadays with the narratives in the media, but it's a destructive one. It's destructive to society itself. So when we talk about comics here, I mean, yeah, okay, we're talking about sort of a relatively trivial manifestation of it, but it's we're looking at something in microcosm that is significantly harmful to society as a whole and to men's souls. And the writers who are shoveling this dreck know that, and that, frankly, that's what they're after.
I think you see that in a lot of media. I mean, we could again, multiple videos have been done and could be done again on how that's happening within science fiction, within adventure. The pulp revolution push is obviously an attempt to bring some of that back, to draw those male readers back again to science fiction or to adventure. Classic example of that is the stamp or the Hugo Award. I mean, after about 1998, that was my stay away flag on any book I saw. I knew that if it had won the Hugo Award, it was going to be boring as all get out and preachy. It would have its political bent, and that's not why I read science fiction. That's not why I read adventure. That's absolutely antithetical to it.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think, frankly, that applies relevant to the main topic here. That when I see the Marvel or DC imprint, that's the same to me as saying that this is a Hugo Award winner, right? It's a statement that this is not for me. It's pretending to be something of high quality, but in fact, it's deconstructionist garbage. It's hostile to. Forget about like what I believe and everything. It's hostile to good storytelling. I can't tell you how exasperating it is to want, because you have this draw. I have this draw of nostalgia, and I think most people do. And I think it's very powerful, too powerful. But every so often, I'm like, I want to go to a comic book store, and then I go to a comic book store, and I really try, and I'm like, I'm going to pick something up. And I walk out of there and I flip through some, as you know, I try to read through them and see something will jump out at me, something I will like, and I can't find it. And it's really terrible to go through comics and see how crushingly boring and insipid and tedious and irrelevant they are. They're you have, I mean, part of it is decompression, where literally nothing happens in the book. But the other part is there, there's the preachy tone, and there's like the sort of middle school banter that people who have not grown up imagine that other people like the other adults talk like, but they don't realize that that's what adolescents talk like. And this is the pretty much the hallmark of any comic written by the Tumblr set, by people who they literally recruited from Tumblr or from these SJW dens of scum and villainy. And there's no interesting story. The characters are all flat. The characters are completely one-dimensional. They have no telos, and they have no ethos. And frankly, they don't have a logo either. They have no reason for being, except as sort of like a really boring mouthpiece from the author. And you expect that in like a textbook, or you expect that in what they call like non-genre literature, but you don't expect that in comic books.
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead, Shell.
Oh, I was just no. I was just going to say, like, they also have a very, and I'm not going to get into it in this video in particular, but a very warped sense of like what's right and what's wrong, even far beyond the Batman weighing whether to kill the Joker or not. The last Batgirl comic that I picked up, and it was the Batgirl comic I also put down. It starts off with the mystery is her. The mystery of the book is her trying to remember what happened when she was blackout drunk from a party the night before. And
this is Barbara Gordon Batgirl too, not Cassandra Cain or any other Batgirl.
Yeah, and it was one of those things that I had seen the book touted as like a good thing for like younger readers to pick up again, and it was supposed to be like the lighthearted adventures, and I was like, being blackout drunk is a real problem. And there was even a moment in there where she couldn't remember a guy's name, and everyone was really like, oh, Barbara, you were making out with this guy. And it seemed really wrong to me because, obviously date rape is bad, but it was supposed to be funny because she couldn't remember what she did with the guy. But if you reversed that and the guy couldn't remember what she did with her, then like that's the biggest can of worms. It should not be in a book that's, at all targeted toward younger readers. And, I can't even go into how wrong that was. And it's like that, and no one treated it as a bad thing. It's like,
well, at least she wasn't smoking cigarettes.
I was just going to say that. I was just going to say because they have no problem portraying all kinds of alcohol. I mean, like absolute drunks and hedonistic use of other drugs. Like they're, but if they can't smoke, Nick Fury cannot even chomp on a cigar anymore.
Or Ben Grimm, yeah.
Or Ben Grimm, right? Why? Like, why did that become? I really don't understand that. That's a whole other can of worms, though, I guess. But
well, it's really kind of freaky because, and again, let's see what.
Okay.
All right. There are so many items like that: anti-smoking, vegetarianism, animal rights that harken back to the National Socialist policies of 1932 and 33, and it just like. Are you really pushing this? It's really freakish that it really is becoming more of a, it's you've skinned the thing and now you're wearing its skin as a suit, looking for everyone to bow down before it.
That's another thing that they have no problem with. Like we mentioned before, that they have a real problem with marriage. They have a real problem with, committed relationships, but they have no problem with casual sex. I mean,
families. And I think I've talked to both you and Shell about this too. Why haven't we seen the Fantastic Four come back to Marvel Comics? I mean, I know recently, I think they tried again. I'm not sure if it's still floating around, but I truly believe the reason Fantastic Four never came back for what was about a 3 or 4 year hiatus.
Yep.
There's no one at Marvel Comics who knows how to write a family.
Right, and they actually had one of the only more recent comic runs that I enjoyed was the Future Foundation, and it was after Human Torch had supposedly died, and of course he hadn't, but it was. They changed the FF, but it was even more of an extended family. But it got weird really quick, to the point that some of the good parts were like Reed's dad was there, who had Nathaniel Richards, who had like the Kang's ancestor or whatever he was. He like came back and like that part was good. But they did some interesting things. I don't think we have enough time to get into what went wrong on that, but that would be an interesting topic for a video too. But yeah, that was the last time. Like the key point of the Fantastic Four is that they're a family. And if you don't understand it, if you don't like families, You can't do the Fantastic Four. And I think it's very telling that Marvel has not been able to make a success of the Fantastic Four since at least the 1980s.
Correct. And if you take a look at any of the heroes, I don't care what company they're banner, which company's banner they're under. There's a key conceit to every hero, and if that conceit flies in the face of modern sensibility, if you want to call it that, the hero that's going to be produced by that group of individuals will not ring true. The Fantastic Four is a family. Without Uncle Ben's murder, there is no Spider-Man. Without the murder of the Waynes, why does Batman exist? You can kind of step down point to point. The conceit might not be as dramatic as that, but it exists. And as soon as you start playing against type, as soon as you start breaking the head canon, I think that's where you start falling away. I was just jotting down prior to the video, where did I stop reading comic books? And I'll give you a couple of them. Avengers was number 71. Fantastic Four 108 was when Kirby left. I was kind of out of it. X-Men 65. I have X-Men 66, but 65 is really the end of that series. Iron Man 24. Daredevil 68. Captain America, I believe, was 120. Just some examples. At that point in time, the headcanon, I couldn't have told you that's what I would call it at that point in time, but it felt off. The feel of the books when I had started reading them just wasn't there anymore. And I've talked to Shel on other social media too, that I wasn't an exclusive Marvel DC reader. I was a huge Charlton Comics fan, a Gold Key fan. So a number of those heroes weren't around long enough to really kind of degrade, but Marvel and DC is really where you see that there's going to be multiple artists and writers working on these titles, and just the change of an artist can make such a dramatic difference. The classic one is Steve Ditko leaving Spider-Man and John Romita coming on. The Romita books were great, but they weren't Spider-Man anymore. Not really.
Yeah, and maybe that's a problem that fundamentally is unsolvable when you have a corporate owned character and they're not. I think, frankly, we're seeing that with Star Wars. And I'll often have occasion to bring this up, but the people that write Star Wars now were not. George Lucas certainly has his faults as a writer, and certainly he had help making really good movies back in the 80s, right? But no one really knows Star Wars like him. And you certainly can't throw it to a committee of hacks, most of which are comprised of marketing people and then agenda-driven people who came along 30 years later to take over this, because it's his vision, and now his vision, you can't take over another man's vision, except maybe if you're like his son or something like that, you could do that, but it's pretty rare.
Right. I completely agree. And I think you guys, since you're X-Men fans, think back to when, and again, you'll know this better than me, when Magneto was, kind of drifting out of the, leader of the evil super mutants, and was starting to become at least kind of, neutral. He was fighting for the mutants, but he realized that, okay, I can't just keep attacking Homo sapiens the same way I'm doing it. It isn't helping. It's not getting me to my ultimate goal, which is, building a culture, building a country, or whatever it happened to be, where mutants can be safe. He was moving into that transition of, we're going to take this villain and potentially make him into a hero. At the same time, or a similar time, Professor X was now walking. He had I believe, a cloned body, and his brain was transplanted into the cloned body that was healthy. And what did the suits at Marvel decide to do? Well, we can't have Professor X out of the wheelchair. So, boom, he's back in the wheelchair. We can't have Magneto becoming a good guy. He needs to be the quintessential bad guy. So again, in that 90s realm, if I'm not mistaken, you again had a let's undo a whole bunch of stuff that we had moving forward. It's not really a reboot, but in some respects it is. But we were watching these characters develop down a channel, and because of the decision that was made at a higher level within the company, essentially the suit said do this, so the characters were changed. It doesn't make any sense, but the characters were changed.
The other thing is you had you had people that really cared about the characters and that had become fans of it. And I mean, on the creative staff, John Byrne left X-Men because he didn't like the direction Chris Claremont was going in and couldn't rein him in. John Byrne created Kitty Pryde. Chris Claremont kept wanting to do things with Kitty Pryde John Byrne didn't like. The Magneto thing was a big thing because there are a lot of people that were like, well, Magneto's evil. The very first thing he does is try to, presumably kill a bunch of human soldiers off screen, and then he's going to blow up parts of the world with nuclear warheads. He's not a good guy.
Mm-hmm.
And they just kept trying to make him a hero. And
I think that we were in the paradoxical situation where everything's changing in the sense that they're constantly resetting it, right?
Mhm.
But they're resetting it to how the way things were. So everything's changing, but it's always the same. It's like
Right.
Groundhog Day. If you've seen that movie, you're
and
just going back to what whoever is in charge wanted to see. Same thing with Spider-Man's marriage. Like, I don't like that he's married, and I think you can definitely make missteps, especially when you have teams of I don't know, scores of writers over like a 35-year period, and say, gee, I really this character has kind of gone in a direction that is maybe not good for the character, not suitable for storytelling.
Right.
But they also don't allow any room for growth, and combined with this lack of understanding about really base standards of right and wrong. Like they could have Magneto become a good guy. For instance, if maybe he has there's history is filled with bad people, like really awful, nasty people. Like every saint you read about, they're like, we use the term hagiography incorrectly, because that hagiographies, the lives of the saints, aren't really about how great they were, about what a rotten bastards they were.
Right.
And yet they did something. They changed. They repented and they became good. And they had the grace of God and so forth, everything else, but fundamentally they had a change, and it was the message of redemption was possible. And I think that's an important thing, but you also can't sell that redemption if you don't know what's right and wrong. Like if Magneto, you can't just say Magneto's a good guy now because he's watching over the New Mutants. You have to say Magneto's a good guy because you see his behavior change. He no longer maybe he has the opportunity to slay an old enemy, and he doesn't take it. He has the opportunity to use force to inject radical ideology into the New Mutants, and he doesn't do it.
Well, I don't even know how to describe what that whole thing was, because the point was he wasn't a hero. He wasn't a hero at all when he did it. It was literally Professor X's dying wish, because Professor X always dies and comes back.
Of course.
Was, hey, I want you to watch the New Mutants. And Magneto's like, don't ask me to do that. And Professor's like, yeah, I'm going to do that. And then he dies.
And that's also does that ring true? Like, would Professor Xavier, who I will say the correct pronunciation, and despite what Stan Lee says, his name is Xavier, would he say, take this murderous genocidal lunatic and turn over the tutelage of his most impressionable youngsters to him without knowing, without having seen a change in character? I mean, maybe, but that would be really stupid of him.
To be honest, I don't know one way or the other, but it's the thing, when you're a writer and you make a decision, you have to run with it. But the thing is, you actually have to run with it. There should have been a much bigger flap about, say, a wanted criminal being the head of, everyone knows he's hanging out at the school. Why isn't he arrested? Why isn't he stopped? Why don't the other X-Men stand in? Like,
why don't the Avengers raid the X-Mansion to bring him in or something like that? Yeah.
Right.
Again, it comes back to the actions have consequences, and that's another one of these factors that we've got going here is there aren't any consequences.
Mhm.
There isn't that second, third, fourth, fifth level order, second, third, fourth, fifth order effect that is going to happen. The verisimilitude is not there for, oh, I'm just going to plunk him in here now, and now he's going to be acting this way. Why?
Right.
You've given me no reason to believe that character is going to act that way. Well, I want him there. Well, good. Work it up. Roll up your sleeves and do the writing thing. And I think that's some of the challenge too, as you've got people who see much like writers see science fiction as the stepping stone to literary works. You see people who are writing comics who really want to get into doing either literary or science fiction or doing writing. And again, a group of failed writers who are just going to while away their time in this media and not understand it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think telling stories is an intrinsic part of the human condition. Yet, of all the humans that have ever lived, we only remember a relatively small amount of stories, which just goes to show that there's a lot of people that really want to write, and God bless them, but they're not cut out for it.
Right.
I don't remember. Daddy Warpig retweeted it. I don't know who originally said it and had the debate, but it was in the Pulp Rev group, and they said something like, you shouldn't be afraid to step back in your science fiction and tell the story about two burnt out mech pilots wasting away in the nursing home or something.
Right.
And it's one of those things where it's like, yes, there are absolutely authors that could make a good story out of that. But if you're thinking that that's where you want to go and your good story, and it's not like a bet or something that, someone convinces you to do over beer and then you're stuck doing it, that's not your good story. That's not where you want to go, and you need to realize that. So that reveals there's nothing wrong with that. Somebody could a deft hand could take that and make that a really touching story, really provocative story, and it could be excellent, right? But it reveals what they really want to do. What they really want to do is write literary fiction. Maybe they want to get awards. They want to be talked about in highfalutin society. They don't want to be known by the hoi polloi. They don't want to write. They're the kind that tell their students Edgar Rice Burroughs is trash, and Edgar Rice Burroughs writes back, well, that may be, but people actually read my books. People like them, and that there's it. You can get into a war between the genres or non-genres and so forth, but and there is their aesthetic value is a relative thing. There's no objective saying that liking superhero fiction is better than literary fiction or romance or something like that. They're different things, and that's okay. But if that's what you really want to do, then go write it. Don't muscle your way in here and take these characters, unmake them, make them unrecognizable, and then say and get mad when people are pissed off about that and yell back at them that they're ignorant and they're racist and they're Nazis and whatever else. Like, oh, you didn't like The Last Jedi? Well, that's because you're a stupid bigot, right? No, it's because it was a bad. It was a bad movie, right? And you people can have, and how dare you do this to the characters I love? I mean, you could go ahead and make other characters, or even do an Elseworlds. In the one of the previous videos that we were talking with Steve about the New Warriors comics, mentioned how we liked Exiles in the alternate universe, because you could take the character who's basically the same, but he's from a different reality, so you could do different stuff with him. Mm-hmm. And if you have that conceit, why not use it?
Right. The challenge, though, is I'm certain that part of this is the desire for immediate success.
Mhm.
So rather than creating a new character, Superman's well known. It's got name recognition, so my
Right.
story is going to be seen by more people. That's the assumption. The continual spike of number ones, is the draw that many of these authors have to say, well, I'm going to make my mark by doing the new Superman, or I'll do the next
Mhm.
version of Superman. It's sad too, because that making that mark, we can see from Comicron and a number of other sources. Yeah, that number one spikes nicely. You might get a 10, 20,000 books, and the number two is going to be a quarter of that if you're lucky. I mean,
Mhm.
that's that Poisson curve drop off is incredible. The fact that you have books that aren't lasting more than 4 to 6 issues is embarrassing. Just
And
absolutely embarrassing.
and it gets worse with every new number one they put out. I mean, it's kind of sad that it still works at all, but every relaunch is weaker than the last, and they must realize that there's an end to this pretty soon, and the end is maybe is the collapse of the industry as we know it. But I don't think that they care.
Well, it's possible. I mean, the IP is there. It can always be used for future movies or
Mhm.
cartoons or whatever other media people might come up with. So, sure, you can play with it, but um, there's an inherent, I think, lifespan to any media like this, that it's going to get old and tattered around the edges. One of the reasons that I think that there was a reboot with Crisis on Infinite Earths for DC was they just didn't see how it was fresh. I disagree with the their collapse of their infinite universe into one world, because I knew it wasn't going to last. That was so
Mhm.
absolutely apparent, an issue two, that this is not going to stick. It was no different than Death of Superman or anything else that's going to
Right.
stick. Um, but there's a thought that if you can refresh it somehow, then it'll last a little bit longer, or I can extend this, instead of just saying, look, there's nobody here who can deal with it. Let me farm it out. Why, let's farm this character out to that group of people who have an innovative idea, and let them run with it for about 3 or 4 years. It may not be the way to deal with it, but there's obviously a thought that if I can hang on to that IP and tweak it a little bit, I'll make even more money for the company.
Mhm.
Uh, I think, as you pointed out, Mike, that isn't lasting any length of time. While I can't really honestly predict that the death of comic books or like Marvel movies. I think we're going to see a precipitous decline over the next 4 or 5 years. I don't really think that superhero movies are going to stick.
Mhm.
I agree with that, and even the Marvel universe. Um, what is their way forward? The characters that everybody really liked are gone.
Right.
And they're not going to be able. I'm sorry, but they're not going to be able to carry it with more Captain Marvel movies and like Eternals. As much as I like the Eternals, right? The Eternals
Hmm.
they're making are
Right.
not the ones that if anybody who knows about them likes them, it's not those.
Right.
Then they've already had flops. People are too eager to overlook Marvel's flops, Marvel Studios flops, like the Inhumans on ABC or the Shield series.
Yeah.
Um,
And Humans has an interesting history. It's another one of those comics that Marvel tried for a long time to try to get an Inhumans book out there that was successful. In fact, 70 or 71, you can do a internet search on this to find the Inhumans. I mean, Jack Kirby was drawing the Inhumans to start with. The person you'd pick, he created them, and that book just went nowhere on a rocket sled.
and they're interesting characters, but I think you have to accept at some point that there's some very interesting character, and especially some of Kirby's conceptual things.
Yes.
He did the Eternals, the Inhumans, the New Gods, Galactus, Silver Star, all this stuff is um, very fascinating, and it delves deep into like the the mythopoeic foundation of humanity and human philosophy and thinking and religion and so forth. But none of them are really successful independently. They're all backups. They're backups to Superman. They're backups to the Fantastic Four.
Right. And if you take a look at what Kirby did, some of that was building the universe. I mean, he built an incredible universe of characters in the first 80 issues of the Fantastic Four.
Absolutely.
As you say, Mike, they really don't stand well alone. Wyatt Wingfoot is a wonderful foil for Johnny Storm and to some extent Ben Grimm. But Wyatt Wingfoot on his own as the She-Hulk's boyfriend, wow, did that drop like a lead balloon.
And they also, but that reminds me of making Flash Thompson into Venom.
Yes,
but a good Venom. Like that was why. Like he's a backup character. And if you want to do a little like a backup featurette in the main thing, fine. But I really don't see. It's like where's my Happy Hogan and Pepper Potts comics? Where's my like even the Jimmy Olsen comics weren't really about Jimmy Olsen. They were, they got the chance to bring the New Gods in and have and expand the Superman universe and stuff like that.
Yeah,
I think there's just certain characters that have to be backup, and that's okay.
Well,
right.
I was gonna say as an example, like my favorite comic book character, at least traditional comic book character, is Cyclops. Cyclops is a very important character. He heads the X-Men. I wouldn't want to see him in his own book with no one else around because, I mean, let's be honest. His thing is, being a Boy Scout and being a leader and being the quiet, sturdy guy. So you'd have issues and issues of him being quiet and sturdy alone.
Well, it's perfectly okay to have a character who, like, even on solo titles.
Right.
The thing about like the 1960s Marvel titles that were so successful, Spider-Man, Daredevil, Iron Man, Captain America, they had extensive backup cast, every one of them. They had their Foggy Nelson and Pepper Potts and Karen Page and Happy Hogan and
well, how people
Betty Brant, J. Jonah Jameson and all these people that were if you don't have the characters interacting with them, you lose a significant part of their character.
Yeah, it's like how do you describe Peter Parker's character if you don't see him bow to JJ and occasionally get angry and beat back JJ every once in a while? Like that's a huge part of who Peter Parker is. And you could be like, oh, well, he's just his boss. And it's like, how he interacts with his boss tells you a lot about him.
Right. And it's I think it's one of the reasons that Ditko pushed for Parker to be very blue collar. And why when he left when he did was Lee was pushing to move Peter Parker into college, and Ditko said no, that's not the character, because just what you're describing there, Shell, Parker didn't interact with JJ the same way as soon as Romita took over. Now he was like his boss. He was needling him a lot more and ha 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 and who's the senior editor who came on at about that time too, Robbie Robertson.
Mm-hmm.
Again, another character in there that was more a buffer between Parker and Jameson, and the dynamic changed. So you had a different look to that. Again, when we changed that artist who was probably doing a little bit more in the way of co-plotting, at least with Lee on that comic. So if we now move to Lee and Romita co-plotting, they've got different ideas.
Mm-hmm. I was going to say, do you think this might be a good point to say that we're kind of hoping to make this into a series and tackle some issues in the future one by one?
Yeah, I think this has been a rousing success. So if everybody else is on board with it, I would love to do more roundtable discussions like this.
Sure, I'm okay with that.
So our plan with Attention Span Labs in the future, and we've already had a video like this with Steve, but obviously this is a huge and sprawling discussion on, not the goal here isn't just to come on here and complain about comics and how we miss how they used to be, but it's also kind of like a to be quite honest, a springboard in fiction writing, and sort of discuss what works and what doesn't work on particular topics. So our goal is to kind of look at things one at a time and tackle questions like not well, like deconstruction. What's the point of it? How does it work? How does it not work? And how deconstruction can hurt established characters, heroism, the handling families in comic books, even things like beating your reader over the head with your own morals versus actually telling a good story and displaying it in a universe where your morals are intact. So we're hoping to do this somewhat regularly, but that's our plan going forward. We really wanted to give you guys a touchstone on where each of us were coming from, comic books, and what our high points were, what our low points were, and where we're going. And each of us is also, I mean, you guys know Mike and I are creators, but Mike can take that part.
Yeah, so that's exactly what I was going to lead into is we are all creators. We're all doing independent stuff and helping other independent creators, especially ArtAnon. And so part of doing this is one, it's because it interests us. And as I said, this channel is about whatever I feel like talking about, and this stuff interests me. But also it's to give you an insight into what we think, how we deal with storycraft. And rather than my goal is, of course, to get you to go out and buy our books and patronize us and give us money, check out our Ascension Epoch stories. And my goal, serving that goal, is that I hope that you like the way we think and the things that we think are important. And probably if you watch this long, you feel like we do, maybe if you don't agree on specifics, that superhero comics and adventure stuff in general has sort of that we've lost it, and that something seriously is wrong with it, and you're not finding it in Marvel and DC and Disney and the new Star Trek and everything else. So that I hope that this encourages you to go out and look for independent stuff, especially my stuff. But actually, I'll turn it over to ArtAnon. Do you want to plug any of the projects that you're working on?
Actually, not right now. I will throw out there that, but number of couple of projects in the future, but they're in development right now. Let's just say that they are art related. Hopefully, not only concept art but comic books. So we'll see how things shake out.
I'm all right plugging something that he's done. You're going to see some of ArtAnon's work in Days of Wrath, the upcoming Martian War Chronicles book. So
this will be our 7th Ascension Epoch book overall, the second in our Martian War Chronicles series. It features more tales of adventure, heroism, and Victorian post-apocalypse. After during the Martian invasion, there's a signalman story, a fighting Yank story, and also a story about the Martian siege of Baltimore. And ArtAnon has generously contributed some absolutely blistering artwork for that you have to check out. It's worth the price of the book alone.
Well, thanks, guys. I appreciate that.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you for joining us today. Please let us know in the comments if you like this format. If you have any thoughts for us to chew on, any things you think we nailed or that you want to disagree with, please feel free to hold forth in the comments. Please tell your friends and neighbors about this channel. Subscribe, reshare, and like. And thank you very much for listening. This is Mike from Attention Span Labs, signing off.